I really want to see this translated into, these things translated into action, not just like, "Oh, I just want to have a podcast, interview some people." I want to see some actual change, of course. That's the whole reason why we're doing this stuff, right?
That's In the Shoes of Podcast's host, Jeremy Nickel. I'm your host, Lauren Bombas. You're listening to From Blueprint to Solved, the podcast about reimagining and redesigning different spaces to improve sustainability and human wellness. In this episode, Jeremy and I are going to discuss racism, sexual harassment, and how we can use different spaces to combat social issues. Hi, Jeremy. How's it going?
Hey, Lauren. What's going on? I'm doing very well, thank you.
In the Shoes of is really a perfect name for Jeremy Nickel's podcast because it focuses on eliminating polarization. It focuses on looking at what it's like to be another person, to be in the shoes of another person. I asked Jeremy a little bit about if there was a moment or if there was some sort of spark that led him to creating his podcast. For Jeremy, there had always been something there, a sense for equality and justice. Maybe it was the fact that he hated watching people get bullied as kids, or maybe it was the recent election of our current president, whom he really was neither fond of or supported. Jeremy just really wanted to be able to do his part, to really fight against tribalism, especially with certain crises happening right now, such as the atrocity of ethnic cleansing happening right now in Myanmar, former Burma. Besides what's going on right now in Myanmar, are there any other social issues that really stand out to you right now that we need to work on?
Yeah, there's definitely a few.
Come on, Lauren, I can't pick one.
There. It is hard to pick one, but there are a few that I can kind of narrow my focus onto, and one of them is just from the perspective of, let's go to this nation right now, and this is a very heavy on my mind recently, especially after I've been listening to another great podcast called Seeing on Radio, the Seeing White series, and all about, bigotry is one thing where obviously bigotry is something that needs to be dealt with and still eradicated. Even at this day, you think that we'd be past a lot of things, but we're not. Look at Charlottesville, look at the neo-Nazis coming out and all of that. But I think the bigger issue and the perspective from especially people of color in the States here is we need to understand their perspective, especially coming from, people who are white, to understand the complete misappropriation of power and who has held the power for so long. And we're talking about, institutionalized racism.
Jeremy made a really great point about racial equality and race. His comment was that even though we have moved past segregation, we can't forget that there's still racial tension and racial issues.
We're just kind of like missing the bigger picture and really kind of just trying to avoid the discomfort of actually acknowledging that, no, this is still something that we need to talk about. If I could just go on a more just general, like, what is the basis for all of these things, whether we're talking about misogyny in the workplace or, even just something like catcalling and women being harassed. I was talking about that with one of my, with Amy Dietz, a person I interviewed earlier, and she, was talking about it. Of course, and right now we have a big thing going on with, how do you pronounce his name, Weinstein or whatever, and in Hollywood, the producer, just total sexual harassment. You have Cosby, you have whatever. And it's crazy that men still justify things. And I think it all comes down to just complete dehumanization and objectification of various peoples, whether it's women or a group of people, a race of people, or whatever. It's like, you're not seeing things from their perspective, right?
What are some of your ideas about how we can use space to really combat the specific social issues that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think, and that's something, even before we got hopped on this interview, just for the listeners there, Lauren was awesome in sending me over some great questions to think about. And thank you, Lauren, because that made me really think about, well, yeah, what kind of additional actions can I take as aside from just having this medium of a podcast? And, I think there are a couple different things we can do, and I don't have all the great answers right now, but I think one is to, of course, continue in this 2D space where definitely keep on creating visual and audio media to get, because people get absorbed in it. Has the potential to have a visceral effect. And that's what it comes down to. I feel like we need visceral emotional effects. Otherwise, we probably won't see much of a change, if at all. So that goes on to, and this is another thing I have to thank you for, is going into that 3D space, and especially using like VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. And I was thinking about it because I was talking with someone else the other day. Oh, yes. Okay, so let me tell you a little story, and I'll weave back into my main point here. But I was talking with this girl the other day, and she was telling me about how she was at a bar. And this guy started talking to her, and she's like, "Nah, I'm not interested," or whatever, Started walking away. He grabbed her shoulder, just held on, turned her around, and she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" She's like, and then he just kissed her, like right there at the bar, just kissed her. And she's like, "No, what?" Started this like pushing him away. "What are you can't do that to people." He's like, "No, that's how we do it now. You're just older, you're old school or whatever." And I was so incredulous when I heard that. I was like, "What are you talking about? That is not right whatsoever."
After hearing about the story of the woman being kissed at the bar, Jeremy really liked the idea of working with virtual reality to really work on different perspectives. And so we kind of put our heads together. I really liked the idea of public engagement. I thought that maybe having people who, whatever their opinion is about sexual harassment, I thought it'd be interesting to have this public space where people can go and watch virtual reality simulations to be able to understand how to be advocates, how to prevent it, and then also be given different resources. Are there any other podcasters or guests that you might have had on that you think have had some really awesome insight into how we can really examine and bring to light different perspectives in terms of creating different spaces or really improving different environments, creating different environments?
I'm going to go with a couple different things here. I'll talk about some of my, the people, my guests on my podcast, as well as some of the people I'm looking to interview as well in the future to see if maybe, if anybody out there even has any ideas about what kind of environments we need to create. But I'll first start with with some of my guests. So the first one, obvious one that comes to mind is Tina Russick from the LA Mission. I was over in LA. This was not during the podcast movement conference, but before that. And I went over to the LA Mission and just saw what they did there. What they do is they provide a really much needed environment for the homeless population in LA. And of course, that's not the only mission, but where structure, food, education work, and ultimately a lack of drugs, let's be honest, are used to help people get out of the homelessness cycle. And of course, it's a religious organization, so they use religion too as a basis for them to help people get out. And to me, it's like whatever works to get people out of homelessness and back on their feet, and living in society as with purpose and not that just complete hopelessness. Another person, and that's of course just that 3D environment where they provide everything that's needed, very structured and all that. But then you have, of course, the 2D environments where it comes into play, like Yossarian Cole. I interviewed him, and he wrote the book, The Wicked Games of Temporal Logic. And what I like about that kind of thing is that it's different. It's not written in standard dry medical jargon. It's much more like reading. Have you heard of Chuck Palahniuk? I don't know how do I pronounce his last name? Palahniuk. But he wrote like Fight Club, Survivor. His writing is very different. And reading Yossarian's book, it's kind of like that. It's like, what is happening here? It's a mind trip in a way, but it's also a way to help the reader identify with and at least understand addiction and aberrant behaviors and thought processes that's associated with like bipolarism and alcoholism and various other addictions and things like that. So I think, anytime we can do it in a different way too, that's really innovative ways. That's always a really cool thing.
We did talk about podcasting. You mentioned podcasting as a really great medium, which it is a fantastic medium because it does fill a space, I think a lot of times when I talk to people about my podcast, they think about architecture as a space, but space can be so many different things. Really what people, what they listen to, what they read. You mentioned you mentioned a book, and what people, how people talk to themselves even really shapes their environment and really who they are. What are, as a podcaster, what is the message that you're really looking to bring across to your listeners, and what is the change that you're hoping they take away from it? What is the impact you're really looking for?
All I can say to that is Iowa. And actually, it's not Iowa, the state. I came up with this thing. It's actually EIUA, but I like saying Iowa because it makes no sense at first, but it's kind of random. But it stands for eliminate, illuminate, understand, and accept. So the eliminate portion of it is, the main goal is to really eliminate as much as possible misunderstandings and really just diabolical ideology. Case in point, let's just eradicate North Korea. What? You just want to kill a lot of civilians because of two insane dictators? Well, I guess our president supposedly is not a dictator, but you just want to kill like seriously millions of people because of these idiots who are controlling things. It's just crazy to me. So eliminate misunderstandings and eliminate that kind of ideology. Illuminate the issues or roots of errant thinking and shine really bright lights on solutions, which is really kind of what you're doing. That sounds like you're really focusing on that. What are the solutions? What do we do? And then understand is the you. Understand why something is happening, has happened, or will likely happen if we don't do something, and what needs to be done about it. And I think one of the huge things for us as podcasters and for anyone trying to do anything in this space is to give people a reason to care about it. Why should I care about it? I have my own problems. I have my own, I can barely pay the bills. Or maybe I have plenty of money, so I don't really care. How do we get people to actually care and see a reason why we should care about whether it's, and the environment and, well, you want your grandkids to actually have water to drink and things like that. Or, you are in an interracial marriage and you definitely, you want your kids to not experience some of the, racism or whatever it is that's maybe you've experienced. And so it's things like that, just getting people to care. And believe that's still a work in progress. And then the A would be accept too. I think come to just like an acceptance of others and accept the reality of situations. We were talking about how there's a misappropriation of power when it comes to like this country and what race is typically held pretty much the power, right? And to accept it and to discuss it, and also to accept others, but not to accept behaviors and false ideologies. So Iowa, that's kind of my answer to that one.
Jeremy, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to me about how to look at different spaces, reimagine them, and really make an impact.
Totally. Heck yeah, this has been great. Lauren, it's been awesome.
You've been listening to From Blueprint to Solved, the podcast about reimagining different spaces to improve sustainability and, of course, human wellness. Next week, we're going to do a recap on this episode, as well as some information on different projects that redesign different spaces to combat sexual harassment. So stay tuned for that. Also, check out our website, From Blueprint to Solved, for show notes. Talk to you guys next Friday.